by the idea that white male manufacturing workers are the typical worker. Excluded from this are African Americans, immigrants, public sector workers, women. And for over 50 years, the factory worker has really been considered the heart and soul of the union movement. The mainstream union movement in this country is actually a history of racial exclusion, one that has exhibited hostility to people of color and to women, where white workers often go on strike to keep other people from being hired in positions. But we know that this narrative has artificially separated labor struggles from struggles for civil rights, from women's activism, and from community struggles. The historical reality is very different. Struggles against racism and sexism, struggles for community empowerment, have often been very closely tied to struggles for economic justice. There is, in fact, a very long history of people of color and women organizing as the kind of labor and community organizing that our panelists are engaged in, and we'll talk about today, is increasingly important in this current economic climate. Over the past 30 years, we have seen growing income inequality, the highest level in a century, where the top 1% is taking a larger and larger share of the nation's wealth and political power. We've seen a shredding of the safety net, where things like food stamps, housing subsidies, childcare subsidies, cash assistance are being eroded, making it harder and harder for poor families to survive, and at the same time increasingly criminalizing those who are in need. We've also seen an attack on labor rights and a decline in union membership. So in a moment when it seems that the labor movement is on the defensive, domestic workers, restaurant workers, immigrant workers, teachers and other public sector workers, cooperative movements are part of re-envisioning the labor movement. They are breaking down the silos not only among different issues, but also among different sectors of workers. And in this economic climate, this new labor movement is really offering us innovative, exciting methods of organizing, one that sees labor and economics as deeply tied to community empowerment and racial and gender justice. And I think part of why this is so important is because they are really helping to answer that bigger question that is guiding this conference of what does freedom look like. Our panelists have very long and extensive bios and wonderful histories of organizing. I'm just going to tell you very briefly about them today, and you can go online and look at their longer bios. First, we're going to have James Tindewa, who was born and raised in Zimbabwe, is a longtime community activist and organizer, and he is currently a regional organizer with the American Federation of Teachers. Jessica Gordon Nembhard is a professor of community justice and social economic development here at UIC, who researches alternative urban development strategies and cooperative economics. Veronica Avila cannot be with us today, but Nataki Rhodes is stepping in for her, and she is an organizer with the Restaurant Opportunity Center, which focuses on organizing the restaurant workforce. Dominic Molden is a longtime community organizer in Baltimore who works with MANA CDC, and which focuses on community engagement, leadership, and empowerment. Tanya Unzueta, who I think will be with us shortly, is a co-founder of the Immigrant Youth Justice League, and she's been engaging with deportation defense, civil disobedience, and bridging conversations between the queer movement and immigrant rights. Teresa Quinn is a professor of art history at UIC and is involved with the faculty union and campus organizing. And Martine Macias is a UIC student in urban and public affairs as part of the national leadership of United Students Against Sweatshops. So we'll start with James.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Right. You can hear me, right? Okay. 5 minutes is torture for an organizer, but we'll give it a shot. The attack on public sector unions has removed many legal protections workers once enjoyed. From the perspective of teachers, the impact has been severe and multidimensional. The attack on teacher unions has created a power imbalance that has enabled elites to impose drastic policies in the name of education reform, policies that compromise the rights and freedoms of teachers, students, and parents alike. The elites have intentionally starved schools in order to justify closing them and handing them over to private charter school operators. As we speak, 65,000 Chicago public school students are classified as dropouts, and corporate education reforms, including the closing recently of 50 schools in Chicago, are implicated in that. As we know from the research, dropping out of primary school increases the likelihood of contact with the criminal justice system and often ends with the ultimate denial of freedom, jail. In Chicago, 3,500 teachers have lost their jobs since 2008. Nationally, 300,000 teachers lost their jobs in the same period. Like everyone else, those laid off teachers have to adopt survival strategies, including taking multiple jobs. This, of course, affects their right to enjoy leisure time. And their reduced incomes often, and they often come with fewer benefits, heightens family problems and even threatens their health. But teachers are not the only ones in these communities who have to adopt survival strategies. Community residents whose livelihood is tied to the economic value these last remaining middle-class jobs bring also try to survive. Unfortunately, for some, this means increased crime, which further threatens the freedom of other residents, not to mention what happens to the perpetrators themselves. The assault on unions has brought fear in the workplace, especially for older, more experienced teachers. The fear that you can lose your job tomorrow to be replaced by a younger Teach for America recruit. This climate of fear produces insecurity that forces people to trade in their rights for job security. We see this phenomenon, for example, in the sort of this debate around personal privacy versus national security, but that's an aside. With their uncontested power, the bosses have imposed high-stakes testing that further oppresses students and illegitimately determines the professional fate of their teachers. Thus, students are reduced to a test score, stripped of imagination and the right of critical thought, while teachers live in fear of losing their jobs. For charter school teachers, the denial of union rights implicit in the charter business model means you can't freely advocate for your students or for your own best interest. Ironically, charters are cast as the ultimate symbol of freedom. You hear about freedom of choice, etc. Yet teachers must check their constitutional rights at the door and leave the decision-making, the thinking, essentially, to the bosses who claim a monopoly on wisdom. For charter school teachers, the loss of intellectual freedom is a particularly worrisome paradox, considering that these are educated people, and most of us believe that a college degree, a college education ostensibly should nurture and promote critical thinking. The free market ideas employed by many charter schools, an impossible work schedule combined with a low wage, has resulted in a loss of leisure for teachers and is a prescription for the increased teacher turnover that we see time and again. This lack of job security and stability obviously does not bode well for personal freedoms. The concept of charter schools and the attack on public sector unions reinforce the notion that freedom is the ability to succeed on your own, rather than a collective enterprise. Students last night that wonderful kid reminded us of what Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, once told Karen Lewis, that 25% of the students in Chicago schools will never amount to anything. This ideology ignores the reality of our connectedness as human beings. What kind of freedom, for example, will the few chosen students who succeed enjoy while their marginalized peers sit on the margins of society? I think a lot about Hadia Pendleton and how those two young boys that shot her, that their lives are marginalized. These are the sort of the kids that are disposable, according to Mayor Emanuel. So this notion that we can carve out these oases of sanity and fight for just a few kids is belied by the fact that we sort of live in the same shared space, and that what happened to Hadia Pendleton is an example of that. Finally, 26% of black workers who belong to unions are in the public sector. So the attack on teachers and their unions has serious implications for social stability. This is essentially eroding the economic base of many struggling communities. I was an organizer back in 1996 during that awful heat wave that killed 700 senior citizens. One of the things that we didn't hear about was the extent to which seniors who were afraid for their lives chose to lock themselves in and close the windows rather than because of fear of crime and burglaries. And so this kind of instability affects the social fabric and the security of everybody else in the community. So ultimately, what we need is a shared sort of solidarity among unions. I was really bothered back in the 1990s during the debate on welfare reform that I think too many union members and unions themselves thought that the issue of welfare was the exclusive experience of poor people, and there was no real solidarity. So the old saying holds true that once they came once for Jews and nobody spoke up. They came for, this is the pastor during Second World War who wrote a famous sort of a kind of mea culpa, a pastor in Nimola, who was really bemoaning the lack of solidarity during that period. They came for Jews and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. They came for labor union activists. I didn't speak up because I was not a unionist. And then they came for communists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. And then when they came for me, there was nobody else left to speak for me. So this really holds true. What we need is real solidarity among labor unions across the board.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jessica Gordon-Numhard, and I'm actually not here. I'm at John Jay College, which is part of City University of New York. So I'd also like to start by recognizing the original owners of the land, the First Nations that were in the Illinois area, and also to acknowledge the struggles of enslaved laborers that came before us. I study economic justice and equitable development and the ways that alternative economic structures like cooperatives make space, both for people to kind of anchor and stabilize their situation and then to move forward to create better well-being and more wealth. Labor and cooperatives actually have a long history and started together, even though we hardly recognize that. But were forced to separate as it became too contentious and too political. I just finished a book called Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperatives, and one of the things that comes out in that is how dangerous it was to actually be involved in cooperative economics and alternative economics. And in the early days in the 1800s, when the unions were also actually focusing on co-ops, it wasn't good enough just to get labor and employment, but to actually get ownership and control over the means of production. It was actually most of those strategies were attacked both physically and economically, so that they had trouble surviving. However, we still have a very long history in both, and my specialty is in the cooperative side of that long history. I'd like to remind us of that history because often we get stuck in the old traditional models that don't work for us, and we get nervous about trying something new. And when you can see how it did work and what got accomplished in the past, it's much easier for you to think about what we could do and accomplish in the current era. So I promised that I would talk a little bit about the solidarity economy, which is kind of the broader overview of what co-ops are in. So I'm going to tell you just briefly what the solidarity economy is, then briefly what co-ops are, and then briefly a couple of examples, and probably my 5 minutes will be up by then, or maybe before then. The solidarity economy is a set of alternative economic frameworks that are grounded in solidarity and cooperation. They connect official and unofficial, or formal and informal ways of doing exchange and production. So they include things like gifting and barter, as well as cooperatives and credit unions and any locally controlled, non-exploitative kinds of businesses. If I had a PowerPoint, we have a beautiful little circular graph that shows you all the different areas in creation, production, exchange, consumption, and surplus allocation, where you can talk about the different kinds of informal and formal economic exchanges that are non-exploitative. So then cooperatives are a more formal type of non-exploitative exchange in the solidarity economy. And for cooperatives, they really address market failure and operate by joining people according to need rather than according to whether they want to make profit or not. And they work democratically. We usually coin the phrase one person, one vote, meaning every member gets an equal vote to everybody else, whereas in an investor-owned company, it's a matter of how much money you put in, how many shares you have, is how many votes you get for the say. So you can organize any kind of economic activity into a cooperative business, which then is jointly owned by a variety of people who all put in the same amount of equity. And I have 1 minute left. So you can ask me more about if you want to know exactly what a co-op is. I want to end with just sort of a listing of some of the ways that cooperatives address the economic challenges that we have. So with the export of capital out of communities, you have community-based credit unions. And with predatory lending, you also have credit unions. Unemployment, you have worker co-ops, which are ways for employees to actually own the company themselves. Poor quality education, you both can have co-op schools, which are either run by the teachers themselves or run by the parents who then hire the teachers. But also co-ops in general promote education on a variety of levels, because in order to participate democratically, you have to have enough information, and so co-ops promote education. The housing crisis, which if you were here for the earlier panel, the limited equity co-ops and other housing co-ops can help address the housing crisis, and then poor nutrition. Co-op grocery stores and other kinds of food sovereignty based around collective ownership can do that too.
Hello, how's everyone doing this afternoon? That's good. My name is Nataki Rose, and I'm here with representing Restaurant Opportunity Center. Restaurant Opportunity Center is a worker center that helps restaurant workers throughout Illinois. Well, actually, we have 11 chapters across the state of United States. But I'm working out of the one in Chicago. Basically, we are right now in a policy process of trying to get the minimum wage moved up for restaurant workers and bartenders and servers. Restaurant industry is an industry where low-wage workers, as myself has been for 10 years, has been the hardest hit as far as labor discrimination, sexual harassment, as far as sexual orientation. It's a really big problem in the restaurant industry. The restaurant industry is a growing industry, and right now the restaurant industry is like 1.3 million here in the state of Illinois. It has such an economic embargo on the workers in the industry that it's hard for the workers to get pay for their food and to take care of themselves and their family. So we at the Restaurant Opportunity Center, as myself, go to champion, to stand in solidarity, to move minimum wage, to move a lot of, as far as paid sick days. That was the other day, they was trying to get paid sick days here in Chicago. So we work with the labor department a lot as far as work justice and everything. Me, myself, I am a restaurant person. I've been in the industry over 10 years now. And I stand here to keep pushing for us to get the word out, to let people know that Restaurant Opportunity Center is here. A lot of people don't understand about working in the restaurant industries, the ups and downs that it has. It's $4.95 here in Chicago. In the state of Illinois, it's $4.95 if you're a server. And outside of, as far as on the federal level, outside of the state of Illinois, is $2.13 an hour working. And so we at the Restaurant Opportunity Center is just making awareness, letting everyone know that when you go out and see your servers and see your bartenders, know that they're just making $4.95 an hour. So we try to go, we just came back from Springfield with the minimum wage, with other different coalitions and everything. So we really try to keep our eyes and ears open, working with different coalitions as far as getting different bills moved. We work with the Labor Department because a lot of bartenders and servers face sexual harassment, where people touch you where you don't want to be touched, say derogatory things to you that they don't supposed to say to you. So we at Restaurant Opportunity Center, we help them get the legal help and help them on the path that they need to help. And plus, it's good jobs out there. It's actually people that do want to pay. It's just more people that don't want to pay. And when you invest in your workers, you invest it into your business. So we really try to push people that's opening up new businesses to make sure that they want to open up a good business with a good business plan. So when we do have to go through minimum wage and stuff, you won't hear the outcries of small business, all these businesses about to close, is because they don't have a good business strategy as far as to hold their business. So we as workers, we're not here to put people out of business, but we do want people to make sure that we get paid the work that we do for businesses. So we're just trying to push for better jobs here in the state of Illinois. In the state of Illinois, every woman, man, teenager, my son is in college, I want him to work a good job. He liked the restaurant industry. It is okay money, but I'm not rolling in dough, as everybody say, like you rolling in dough, you get all these tips, this, that. No, sometimes you don't make all the tips. Sometimes tips is not there. So I thank you for having me today to sit on your panel. If anyone has any questions about Restaurant Opportunity Center, we're located 77 West Washington. I'll be right here for take any questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Dominic Molden, and I'm the resource organizer for 1DC. And 1DC stands for Organizing Neighborhood Equity. And I want to start off by asking you a few questions. The first one is, by show of hands, how many of you want to be free?
2 hands.
All right, 2 hands, there we go. Second question, how many of you consider yourselves to be a hard worker? 4 hands.
5 hands.
I started off with these questions because 1DC, our mission is to exercise the political strength to create and preserve economic and racial equity. And in doing that, we're one of these groups that people complain about, that we want people to study, we want people to do research. We believe that residents have their own answers. We believe that residents are organic intellectuals, and we believe that our people want to be free, our people are smart, and our people do want to work. But there's an issue in the country that this country refuses. We have these myths about black people, right? And my family taught me some of these myths. And here's the first one. And we call this working while black. The first myth, we can't find any black folks to work because they're lazy. How many of you heard that before? Right. The other issue, black folks are unskilled, right, as a group of people. So they lump us into this whole group, and so how many of you people in this have skills with the Z's? They have skills, right, okay. So these are the things that we as an organization are confronting, because we organize in what they call the human rights context in the District of Columbia. And believe it or not, Washington, D.C. calls itself a human rights city. But in Southeast D.C., the unemployment rate, for the record, is anywhere between 20 to 22%. But we know it's a lot higher than that because of these myths. So what One DC does is organize people around their human rights to housing and land, a right to income and wellness, and we connect all of these things together because we respect the laborer and we respect labor. And what is important is that in order for us to be free, we're actually doing these exercises right now in Southeast DC based off of Iris Young's 5 principles of oppression. So our approach is this. In order for us to be free, we have to confront the exploitation of workers. In order for us to be free, we have to confront the marginalization of workers. In order for us to be free, we have to stop the culture of silencing the workers when they rebel. We have to confront United States cultural imperialism. And the biggest thing is we have to stop violence against workers when they resist. So this is what we're trying to do throughout the city. And it's very important for us to do this because if we don't do this, here's what a One DC organizer texted me today. And this is my closing comment. This is from Myron Reese Chenault. When we talk about freedom and a future with work without black liberation, it's like those science fiction movies where there are no black people in the future. That isn't a future I want to live in. Do you? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Therese Quinn, and I'm here today representing UIC United Faculty, which is UIC's faculty union, which I'm really excited about. I was excited to come here to UIC 2 years ago in 2012 because specifically I knew that this university was in the process, well, actually had already gotten the union, didn't have a first contract yet, but it excited me to be able to come here to a place that had that much organizing happening. So the good news is this spring, that union, UIC United Faculty, got its first contract after several years of organizing efforts that included rallies, all kinds of meetings and organizing things. Working with organizers, Dawn Teft, the organizer who helped us get our first contract, is in the room, so yay, Dawn, for that. And there are many other supporters of that union in the room who went out on picket lines with us and did a lot of work with us. We also had a 3-day walkout this spring, and we had taken a strike vote that would have authorized us to have a much longer and indefinite walkout or a strike. And it was right up to the point where we thought we were going to actually have to do that long, indefinite strike when we were able to get that contract for the administration. So that is very good news and exciting for us all. So yay for the union, which really is yay for all of us, because that's the idea of the union. So as I said, I came to the faculty at UIC in 2012, but right before I had worked as a faculty member at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago here, which has a big reputation as an art school, but it also has a big reputation, or at least it did among the people working there, as an exploiter of non-tenure track employees. In fact, about 75% of the faculty, the teachers at that school were non-tenure track people, and that number was increasing year by year. So the question, maybe it's not really a question, but I'm going to pose it rhetorically. The question is why? Why would that be that situation? There are so many talented artists in this city. Why can they not give some of these artists full-time jobs? Well, as probably you already know, non-tenure track faculty are not on any kind of yearly salary. They are basically all at-will employees. They can all be fired at any time for almost any reason without any notice. And so, of course, they also can't command, and they're not paid a very high salary, despite the fact that they have, in most cases, spent years in school, and they've almost always completed a PhD or an MFA or in some other kind of so-called terminal degree. These educators are paid a non-negotiable fixed amount for each college course they teach, no matter how long they must teach that class, how hard they have to work to deliver the class, and generally without any kind of yearly or multi-year contract. It's just a course-by-course basis that they're hired. Often they have no supply budgets. Frequently, they also have no office. So many people in the room might have taught in those kind of situations. I know that I did before I had a full-time job, so you know what that's about. Usually there are also no benefits either for those kinds of positions. And the rate for a college course varies from school to school, but they're usually between $1,000, as low as $1,000, and $5,000 per class. The Coalition of the Academic Workforce calculates that the median pay per class across the country is $2,700. So with a full load of 8 classes in an academic year, that adds up to only $21,600, and that's before taxes and expenses. So that's a full-time working salary for someone who's been in school for years, and as we all know, has plenty of student debt. So compare that then just to the average salary of $67,400 for a new tenure-track assistant professor in the United States in 2013-2014. So that's a difference of almost $46,000 per year to get that same amount of work done. In other words, every non-tenure track faculty member is another person struggling to pay for food and housing, and just as many people on the panel here have already talked about, those needs bubble up in our society in other ways and cause all kinds of ripple-out effect problems. And that group of people is getting larger every year. So for me, working with the union is a way to address this problem, the shift from tenure-track faculty to non-tenure-track faculty. And one of the big things that our union was able to do was to guarantee a base level, and one of the main organizing points, one of the main organizing points was we were trying to get the base level salary for a full-time working non-tenure track faculty member up to $45,000 a year. We weren't able to get that, but we did get it up to $37,500 from $30,000. So it was a big increase, significant to us, and it's not the end of the work that we're going to be doing, but it's a beginning. Thanks.
So if you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you want to be free, clap 3 times. Awesome. I needed that energizer because I'm a little tired. Not that you all were boring or anything. So I'm a UIC student, and I'm part of the SJI team. It's a privilege to be on this panel, and a privilege to be part of the team that put together this conference. It's lovely seeing all of you here. I first want to recognize the workers that couldn't be in the room. There were a lot of people that I reached out to that I know are working right now, maybe working their second shift, or are kind of in the midst of their campaign and are unable to be here to participate, but definitely their spirits are with us right now, and their energy. So I'm part of a group called USAS, United Students Against Sweatshops, and we're a labor solidarity organization, economic justice organization. We're one local group of a national organization that's 17 years old, also called USAS. And it's an entirely student-run organization. And when I say student-run, what I mean, and I have some notes here, is students get to elect national leadership that determines which kind of staff and which staff gets hired, which campaigns we work on, what the budget is going to be, where we're going to hold our national conference. Students write the Constitution. We pay monthly dues, and part of that has to do with trying to form or develop a student movement that is self-sustaining and not directly tied to nonprofits, not directly tied to foundations, or over-reliant on them for support. And of course, that's not totally accessible to working class folks like myself. On this campus, Teresa already kind of talked about some of the conditions, but for us as students, we started organizing in 2011, I believe, and that first campaign was around solidarity with grad students and their efforts to get a fair contract. And we see our role in this as being able to kind of like leverage our position in the university as students and target administration and use direct action, use creative action to put pressure on them, right? Because adjuncts, tenured faculty, other campus workers can't always do that. They can't really risk, I mean, they could, I guess, but it's better, I think, or it's a lot more interesting if students get involved directly and see their role in this, right? So a lot of what we talked about was that students have a stake in this. Their working conditions are our learning conditions, right? That was fast. So the trend here has been increased tuition while administration salaries go up. The trend has also been lower enrollment of working class people of color, moving away towards the original charter of this university, which was to provide education for children of the working class, children of the community that was completely wiped out in order to construct the university that, where we're at right now. So that's kind of what the framework has been for USAS. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why I engage in labor solidarity and why I choose that as my kind of like strategic site of struggle. I choose a labor movement because I'm a current worker and I'm going to be entering into the workforce when I graduate, hopefully. And all of my siblings, everyone that I've ever met in my life has been a worker. Mostly, and has been exploited in some way. And for my own family, it hits really close to home. Both my parents are low-wage workers. My siblings are now entering the workforce and also experiencing that. And I want to be able to participate in a movement that fights for their rights, gains dramatic concessions, and offers a way for them to build real democratic worker power, right? So that's really the idea of it. And I know that I'm privileged to be a student. Not everyone can be a student. I should also mention that USAS also welcomes youth that are not students to be able to participate in this movement. But through that organizing, we've also come to see that there's other things that we want besides just expanding the pool of wage laborers and just winning those kind of concessions. But we also want to see a university where we have more governance, more control. There's this idea of potentially kind of like disaffiliating with the University of Illinois because of the way that it's become more run like a corporation, right? We've seen this corporatization trend. So what would an autonomous, university look like? There's plenty of models around the world that we can point to and look at and learn from. It'd be interesting to explore that, and that would be kind of like my freedom dream. What would an autonomous university look like? What would be different if we could make decisions about how we treat workers, what kind of curriculum we teach, what kind of programs we offer, and what kind of spaces that we develop and invite people to. Thank you.
So we have about a half an hour for questions. We'll take a couple of questions at once and then let the panel respond.
My name is Brandon. I'm from Memphis. I want to say I'm glad to hear from everybody on the panel. I have a lot of respect for the stance that you take, especially the woman who's from the restaurant workers, because it's good to have the input from somebody who has the on-the-hand experience, which is definitely needed, because tips basically while you're working in a restaurant is like only a fraction of like the appreciation. And I think one of the problems is like, managers run their business for the customers and forget to factor in the workers having their rights being met. But the question I had was to Martine about USAS. I myself am in USAS, but I think I would like them to explain like the two different campaigns that are run, the Campus Worker Justice and the International Worker Justice campaigns. And if you could just explain that, that'd be my question.
Hi, everybody. We actually just had a panel on food justice, food and environmental justice that's so intersected with this panel, of course. One of the things I was just going to ask is actually a quick question, I think, for Rob. I live in New York and just came from Detroit, and I just am so impressed by the Vision for Colors restaurant. So it's a worker-owned restaurant. And so I'm just curious about kind of the vision of that and the possibilities, and you know, if it's happening in Chicago and where else. And so yeah, so that's just my question specifically for Rob.
Take Ahmed.
Yes, I had an experience, and I'd like to ask the restaurant person about it, because at a restaurant here in Chicago, one of the workers told me that she had to give 50% of her tips to the owner. And I asked about it, and I said, well, if you don't get minimum wages, isn't it illegal for them to take 50% of your tips? And I talked to her about it, and I said, well, you should, I referred her to an attorney. I said, here's my email, here's my card. I know an attorney that you should talk to probably help you about with this. Now, she never contacted me, but I had a similar experience at a Chinese restaurant where I paid the bill with my credit card, and I gave the tip of cash. And I saw the young lady who could barely speak English. The owner of the restaurant told her, and she came and had to hand over the tip to the owner of the restaurant. How common is that, and isn't that illegal, and what should be done about it?
Oh, you can ask a follow-up, yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, in DC, what I also understood with workers were also being paid as contract workers, consultants too, so you have to pay self-employment tax on top of that too. So I'm wondering if other people have heard of this as well.
Oh, okay. You want me to respond? Oh, yeah. As far as the tip, yes, that's common. That's the most common thing that we find. We have done research, Restaurant Opportunity Center. We have done research. Like I said, we have 11 chapters. We're in New York, we're in LA, and yes, that is with the restaurant industry, is that the mom and pop stores do take the tip. That's called split tip. Split tip is, yes, you gave me $20 for the service and I appreciate it, but I have to split my tip with the people that has made the table accommodating. So that could be the bartender, that's the bus person, and that may be the owner, as you said. And there's no way to track that. There's no way to get that back. Yeah, so this is real common.
Can you also just talk briefly about Colors Restaurant and maybe how, do you know about Colors Restaurant?
Oh, yeah.
And
so,
as part of a vision of a different kind of economic model?
Yeah, and so Saru Journeyman is the co-founder of Rock United. And yes, so we have opened up Colors in New York and Detroit, Michigan. And that's, as I say, good jobs. As far as we're not just walking the walk at Restaurant Opportunity Center, we're walking it and talking it at the same time. So Colors is a example of what we want the future to look like, with paid sick days, tips. I mean, not just so much as tips, because tips is if you want to, but at least a base salary. A base salary that you can make it on. If you are having a bad day and you don't get no tips, you still can go home, pay your rent, and take care of your family. And without even the young people, because they keep saying young people, but young people want to make money so they can move out the house from with us. So if they can make some money to keep them out their pockets, that's still a good thing. But yes, Colors is a foundation that is a vision of Saru Journeyman from Rock United, and she set forth that vision, and yeah, it's going forward. So that's what we want the future to look like.
Other players?
So it's wonderful to see Brandon, my USAS comrade here. So in terms of like solidarity economy, I think what USAS really thinks about is, just as prisons can't or shouldn't be part of the solidarity economy, we should do our part to remove ourselves from a consumption-based economy that, drives a race to the bottom around the world and deteriorates worker conditions around the world. And that's where we come in with our International Solidarity Campaign, which really kind of targets the contracts that universities have with these major corporations. So while workers are unionizing, organizing in other countries and putting pressure on the suppliers in their home countries, we're kind of organizing on this side of the kind of supply chain and pressuring university contracts or pressuring universities to cut contracts as a way to kind of show that we're disagreeing and totally refusing to participate in that. So there's this like sandwich model of organizing that happens, right? The sandwich pressure. So that's kind of the international solidarity piece. Here at UIC, in the past 2 years, we've gotten UIC to cut contracts with Adidas, Nike, VF Corporation, which owns like 20 brands, all in response to labor rights violations, mostly in the Global South. In terms of the campus worker solidarity thing, the framework that we use for that is that campus workers should be making living wages as long as students are having to pay tuition, especially if that tuition keeps rising, right? We should have a say in how that happens. And a lot of times we have an incredible role to play in shaping their conditions, right? Students can be incredibly effective and strategic with their actions and really put pressure on universities to do what it needs to do the right thing and pay living wages. Mostly around the country that's looked like, solidarity with food service workers, targeting Sodexo, Airmark, and then the other major one. And really kind of tackling the subcontracting that happens, because universities, just like corporations, try to run away from their responsibility. And they try to say, well, it's not us, it's Aramark that has the contract with workers, so we have no control over that. And that's the same thing that happens with garment factories around the world.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jafunza Wright-Carter, and my husband was on the food justice panel a little earlier. And I just wanted to know if the sister could share with us. We actually saw we saw you when you were in Jackson, Mississippi, and so one of our visions at the Healthy Food Hub is to become a community-based worker-owned cooperative. And I just would like to know if you could just share with us, some current examples of cooperative model happening within our community.
So I'm a master's degree at USC. I take a PhD program in disability studies. So I'm really interested in the intersections of disability and work. English, my dissertation work. So I'm not sure where I want this question to go, but I'm wondering if you thought about the intersection, or if disability enters into your conceptualization of work or economic justice, particularly around like shelter workshops or anything of that nature. And a lot of other thoughts on that intersection in terms of the work of living disability. The environment of disability at work, but I don't know, so hopefully there's something here that maybe more of you all pop up, but all right.
Well, I definitely think that disability workers are definitely discriminated in the restaurant industry. I've seen that over the last 15 years, where restaurant workers with disabilities has been discriminated against as far as they movement disability, an amputated disabled person that's being overworked or taken advantage of. So at Restaurant Opportunity Center, like I said, we work with the Labor Department and the disability, the disability board, as far as when that is brought to our attention at Rock Chicago.
Mississippi question.
Oh, and I forgot it.
About cooperatives.
Okay, and what did she? Can you reiterate that question?
Your question was about cooperative
it was
economic
for her.
models?
Yes. Oh, I thought we were taking 3 questions at a time. We're not. Okay.
Well, we were showing you.
All right, sorry, I thought we were taking 3 questions at a time. So actually, I also wanted to mention about the student work. When I was a student, we were trying to get our universities to divest from South Africa, and actually it worked. So just keep the pressure up. It is a strategy that has teeth, and especially if you persist. Cooperatives, and I'll also answer the disabilities one because I was giving a talk yesterday, and another person from the disabled community was asking about co-ops and disabilities, so I'll start there. Actually, the Italians are way ahead of us on this, and there's a parallel conference going on the other side, on the east side of campus, and a member from the Italian Co-op Association is speaking tomorrow at lunchtime. But what they have been able to do is they have national and statewide laws that allow for social service workers to create their own worker co-ops to provide the social services, to get federal and state funds to do that with, and then to turn around not just to have their own worker co-ops, but to use worker co-ops as a process in the kinds of services they give, if it's to disabled people, to mentally ill people, to people coming out of prison, to young people, to recovering drug addicts, and basically part of the treatment that they use is to also help those groups start their own worker co-ops. So they actually have, I believe, for the disabled, they have them do some tutoring. I think they have them working with some of the recovering addicts programs, but they find ways to help the groups that they're serving to create their own worker co-ops. So there is some precedent for that. We don't do that well in the US, but it certainly is possible to try to do that kind of work instead of doing that sort of exploitative handicap workshop kind of stuff. So this would be companies that you would own yourselves, and you could even decide for yourselves what kind of services you wanted to give. No one would have to tell you what kind of co-op to have. In general, the co-op movement, luckily, is actually growing. Well, the worker co-op movement is growing. Some of the other older co-op models, like some of the farm co-ops in the Midwest, are kind of dying out and demutualizing. But there's a strong movement now in the worker co-op area. Some examples, I'll give you a variety of examples. So one, Ujima Collective in Pittsburgh is a group of women producers. They actually, some of them make soap, some of them do makeup, skin products, sorry. Some of them do catering. But what they realized was as small entrepreneurs, they needed a common marketing and marketplace. So they actually formed a co-op to buy a space so that they could each have marketing stalls, they could own their own space, they could be, because what they used to do is just do online and then certain seasonal, like Black Friday, they would have a fair or have a market just before Christmas or something like that. But now they've created their own space through this co-op, and so therefore they own the space as a co-op. They do marketing and advertising and that kind of thing as a co-op, and then they still each individually have their own business in that sense. So it's a second level co-op in that sense. We have sewing co-ops. There's Freedom Quilting Bee, which started in the 60s. There's, oh shoot, I always forget their name. Collective Threads, I think their name is, in Florida. Are they in Florida? There used to be workers-owned sewing company in North Carolina. In those cases, you get women who are seamstresses of some kind, either they're quilting or they're making T-shirts or whatever. And again, this time they would actually be employees of a company, which in the company would be the co-op. They're all equal share owners of the co-op. That means they all have an equal say. In most cases, they would be small enough so that everybody who's a member owner would be on the board of directors, which then is the group that decides on how the company gets run, how much you get paid, et cetera. A lot of these companies, their purpose is to give people quality jobs at living wages with benefits, et cetera. And so that's part of what they figure out when they come together. In some cases, when they're able to make connections with their municipality or get some federal funds, they can actually ensure that they have living wages. Another really good example of taking sort of a traditionally low-wage work and building it up would be cooperative home care in New York City. There's also some other home care. There's one in Philadelphia and one in Wisconsin. What they're able to do, again, they're worker owners of a company, that's the co-op. For the one in New York City, they actually, at the same time that they were organizing low-wage and unskilled women into home care, they also started a nonprofit arm that did training, so they could train you to even be, well, first to be a good home care agent, and then if you wanted to, you could go into nursing. They had nursing training, et cetera, so you could actually move up in the job ladder. You could also move over from home care into the training. After several years, you could move into upper management, so they built in job ladder. But they also did some parallel activity in the industry itself, which is similar to what Rock is trying to do, change the actual industry level. And in that case, they went to the city and the state governments and got Medicaid allocations raised for home care work. Why would they do that? Because if the whole ceiling gets raised, then when they add living wages, wage job levels for their employees, they're still competitive because the whole wage for the industry has gone up. So it's that kind of connections. And I don't know how much time I have. I could give you a lot more examples, but that sort of gives you the basic. Then for food, there are examples of both consumer-owned co-ops. That means the people who want the good food running and collectively running and buying a business, or you can have worker-owned grocery stores where the employees actually own the store but connect with the community in terms of what the community needs.
All right, my name is Richard Wallace. I work for Chicago Workers Collaborative, and we work around temporary work, temporary labor, and staffing networks in the city of Chicago. I haven't heard, I'm kind of surprised that this place isn't packed, because I would imagine that labor is the end of all of these pieces, right? Education and everything like that. You fight for the rights to get education, but if you get education, there's no job when you get out of school. It doesn't matter. And one of the things that I'm noticing in the work that I'm doing right now is that the factory employment sector is dissolved in the United States, right? And what's happening is that they're getting rid of the unions, cutting the unions out, and they're hiring these staffing agencies to hire this kind of adjunct professors, right? Where you come in, you don't make the wages, they have no responsibility for health care or any of that kind of stuff when it comes to these employers. And there's two things that are happening. There's discrimination on one part for African Americans, and there's also discrimination for Latinos. And there's also discrimination and exploitation, right? So you have Latino workers that are, some folks may be undocumented in these spaces, and they're being exploited because of their status, right? And then African Americans are being discriminated against. They're kind of being pitted against each other. It's almost the induction of a new racial wage, you know? And we're noticing that it's going on in this job sector, and it's kind of unspoken, especially in this space. It should be one of the things on the platform, because this is the new labor system in the United States, right? Outside of globalization, like in shipping jobs to other countries, here in the United States, we basically figured out a way to create sweatshops in the United States, right? Yeah. And there needs to be more talk about that. I don't know if anybody on the panel has actually had any experience in that, but that's basically my question. Is there any movements that are going on in the nation, in the city of Chicago, around temporary labor and the issues of exploitation and discrimination that's taking place in those factories and in that industry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna answer now. Okay. Jessica and I can actually answer this question because I think we met each other 9 years ago. Because when we were a CDC, MANA CDC, we actually started a temporary employment agency, but it was controlled by the workers. It was called Enterprising Staffing Solutions, and it actually lasted 9 years. But we had some issues with clients and payments and capital. But the reason why we got involved with the temporary employment enterprise was because it gave the community members control. We controlled it, and then the workers were on the board. And then our philosophy was to organize the workers and teach them about workplace democracy. And that's where Jessica came in. And now, since that business has been defunct for about 4 years, what we are doing now is we're organizing throughout the city, and we're having listening sessions because we're trying to create the first DC-based Black worker center to look at work. And one of the things that you're bringing up that we want to emphasize in our organizing campaign and in the creation of the Black Worker Center is that there's things about labor in the United States that we have learned that we need to relearn, which is how labor is designed to be exploited, to be marginalized. And then, like when people think about wage theft in this country, we actually are involved with Rock DC, and we actually sat on their board when they started. But one of the reasons why we were interested in Rock DC was not only because we wanted to build coalition among people organizing around work and labor, but also because people like me and other folks had families who labor was stolen, right? So a lot of people don't realize that it's not just the immigrant issue. Black people every day are getting their labor stolen right in front of them, and they're being silenced, so that had a connector for us. So we think that you're on point, and we're trying to explore again to build our power and resources to build a Black Worker Center to deal with the fact that we need to create a work culture and industry where we control our labor, right? Where we control our work and we define it, and we make it healthy and well for us at the same time. With Jessica.
Yeah, I would just add, one of the things we did at Enterprising Staffing was to make sure, one of the goals was to find jobs that were temporary to permanent, but also to give people permanent work within the co-op. So even though they might be working one day at the Marriott and one day at Howard or something, they would have a full week of work, because we were piecing together temporary work for them, which worked really well. But one of the problems we had was some of our employers actually wanted to use us as strikers and as scab workers, right? And so we had to cut off some of that, and that was one of the problems even with us of finding regular work for our members, is because we had standards, right? Some of the jobs we wouldn't take or we wouldn't expose our laborers to. But at least they had the choice, right? They could say, we're not going to take that work, we don't want to work with that employer. And that was part of the power.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think, the problem of Black workers being pitted against, immigrant workers can in part be solved by really overhauling the immigration laws, the immigration system, the whole issue of comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship. Because as long as we have millions of workers who are exploitable, right, what makes their exploitation possible, especially day laborers and others, is their undocumented status. So the qualification here, of course, is that it's not enough to just offer legalization. It just means it's going to make easier the job of organizing them and really bringing them to understanding that Black workers and Latino workers and other undocumented immigrants could build real political power together and fight exploited workers, fight employers who want to exploit them, and really even imagine something bigger. There are a lot of issues around climate change, around going back to a real single payer, expanding healthcare in the United States and fighting for living wage laws. So there's a real power to be had once 11 million workers are liberated from the fear.
I was going to say that an idea for a campaign actually emerged at an event that the collaborative was a part of. USAS hosted an event on April 7th where we brought survivors of this Rana Plaza collapse, this factory that collapsed in Bangladesh, killed 1,200 workers. So we had them, and then we also had